The COVID-19 pandemic has placed extraordinary stresses on food supply chains, but yet they demonstrated a remarkable resilience in the face of these pressures. Grocery store shelves have been replenished over time as stockpiling behaviour disappeared and as supply chains responded to increased demand. Stewart Jones, the Customer Executive at RCL Foods, joins us now via Skype to share more on the impact of the lockdown in the food industry. Stewart, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Good morning, Cynthia. Thank you for having me.
What has been the impact of lockdown and as well as, the impact on food prices during this lockdown?
Look, there's no blanket answer to changes in demand. And changes in supply chain. For example, many products will have experienced upward trends in pricing because although global commodities remain pretty flat, the exchange rate has changed so dramatically, not in our favour, over the last 3 or 4 months, that imported crops prices have gone up. And that obviously affects things like feed prices, so that pushes protein pricing upwards. However, particularly negatively affected, obviously, in terms of demand. And that probably accounts for about 40% of the meals that are had. So in that area, because there's less people eating food, for example, the majority of steaks are probably eaten in a restaurant. You could quite often find some cheap steak at your local supermarket because it's not being used by the restaurants. There's a huge number of factors that are affecting it. The other one is obviously that the relief against COVID or the approach to COVID has to be to put your staff first, safety first at all times. And that comes with a cost, the extra cost of PPE, extra cost of social distancing in factories. And factories have experienced real problems with quarantining people and positive cases. So all of those are changes in the supply chain which could see upward movement in pricing over time.
And how can food industry suppliers then overcome such a predicament?
Look, the first thing is obviously to focus on that safety first and make sure you have absolutely the right processes inside your factories and that you're keeping your staff safe. If you put in proper protocols and you run your factory safely, you should be able to continue to keep steady supply. There is some short-term risk. However, from a restaurant side of things, a very different approach is required. There are far fewer customers going out to restaurants, as we know. So you need to get together like we have as a consortium and try and take some effort to increase consumer confidence, make the restaurants also operate safely so customers are happy to go back there. And we as a consortium have got together. It's Unilever Food Solutions, RCL Foods, it's McCain's Food Service, Tiger Brands, and we've got together with Bid Food South Africa, the biggest distributor in the food industry into restaurants. And we've got together to create a campaign which will make a positive impact on consumer confidence and getting people back into restaurants once they're operating safely, which they are from now. And the first execution of that is a creative execution, which is free for all restaurants just to share with their customers. It's called One Meal, Many Thanks. And it's there for the restaurants to say thank you to the customers that are using them. It's not forcing them to go to a sit down or to do a takeaway. It's saying thank you to them whichever way they're comfortable using a restaurant at this time.
Sure. Stewart, we have barely recovered from the devastating drought that particularly hit the Western and the Eastern Cape, and now the COVID-19. I mean, what are the implications of the COVID-19 situation now and in the future for food production, for agriculture, and perhaps fishery and aquaculture supply chains and markets?
Okay. Again, quite a broad question there in terms of there's very different effects in different areas of that. I think that let me try and think about some of the common ones. The different crops will experience different demands. We've actually had very good crops locally in this recent bout, but for example, the alcohol industry is not using the crops to make the beer, so much less demand is putting a lot of crops and a lot of farmers at jeopardy. So where demand is being reduced, those farmers are really experiencing major problems. So obviously restoring that demand will be very important. I think the other biggest thing is factories. Factories are food safe. They're very focused on safety at all times. So the COVID pandemic doesn't really change that, but it enhances it to a different level. The social distancing rules mean that you can't have people working next to each other on a production line. You can't have lots of people going into canteens at the same time. You need people from the same living area, sort of like working in the same area of the factory. And they obviously need significant quantities of PPE every day. So the cost pressures of that kind of approach inside any of our factories is really going to cause, it's very complicated to deal with, and it takes a lot of focus, and we have amazing safety and protocol teams working on it. But it does make life after COVID or life living with COVID much more complicated.
And all the employers and the suppliers need all the support they possibly need. And having said that, how should he then support employees and customers in the next months to protect them? And prevent the health crisis becoming a food crisis?
The first thing is to put their safety first. So if you are an operator of any kind, particularly if we talk about, a factory, or if we talk about a restaurant, you've got to put the safety of your staff first. In this vein, the consortium, particularly Bid Food, have worked with various government agencies like TBCSA and FedHasa and a collection called the Restaurant Collective to make sure that we submitted very strong protocols for people to work with. They've then produced training, which is freely available on an app that they've launched for the industry. And lots of other people doing similar things, but they're providing training so that people know how to operate in COVID. PPE, track and trace. This app does track and trace. The app is called Opus for Business COVID-19 app, and it's being used by the Tourism Business Council to push certification for safe operation. There's worked with the World Tourism Organization, World Tourism Council, who have a global brand called Travel Safe. And we've got a local version of it called Travel Safe and Eat Safe. And they're trying, or as a group, our job is to try and push the safety message as much as possible. And so through the use of that app, we're trying to get certification in place so that people know the rules and have committed to abide by the rules to keep consumers safe in particular. And obviously, it's a very simple process. They're tracking and tracing their people every day, whether it's a delivery coming into the back or a delivery driver going out the front door, or if it's staff coming into work. They're keeping a record of who they're in contact with at all times, and they're using the quarantine process and contacting people and keeping them in safe quarantine if they need to.
And now that customers are permitted in the restaurants, do you think it's a good idea for them to eat inside during this COVID-19 pandemic, and to get a sense that restaurants are ready to welcome back customers, of course, with the necessary precautions in place?
Yeah, look, restaurants are, as I said, always focused on hygiene. The nature of food, forever, you've always had to worry about hygiene. So the restaurant definitely ready to welcome people back on 10 steps further forward than they would normally have. They're sanitizing everything. They're taking people's temperatures when they come in. They're taking records, and they've got their reputations at stake. So most of them are behaving well, and you're in there, you're sitting with a group of people that you know, so you're prepared to take that risk when your mask is not off. Your mask is on at any time when you're walking around the restaurants. The waiters are wearing masks. So certainly, personally, I don't feel that I'm any more at risk going to a restaurant that's operating properly than I am going to a supermarket or any other environment. Right. And at the end of the day, it's fun to go out, and that social interaction is so important for us as human beings. That we need that kind of positivity. However, at the moment, there's also takeout. There's a lot more people doing takeout, because if you don't feel safe, then no one's pushing you to go back if you're not feeling safe. Okay. But many people do feel safe, and large numbers are returning to the restaurants. The biggest critical issue still for the restaurants is the serving of alcohol. While that's not available, quite a few people don't want to go back to restaurants. They're waiting for their glass of wine or their glass of beer to be available. And we're all hoping for that, because so many restaurants rely on it. It often accounts for way more than 50% of their turnover. So being open and welcoming guests in a safe matter or a safe way is actually far from a profitable exercise for a restaurant. They're literally limping along.
Most definitely.
So they'll go further.
All right, we have to leave you there, Stewart. Unfortunately, we're out of time. But then, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for waking up this morning and having this conversation with us.
Thank you.
Stewart Jones, Customer Executive at RCL Foods, just spoke to us on the impact of the lockdown in the food industry. Well, since the lockdown started, we all know that the demand for food, it shot up as a result of panic buying and people stockpiling as a result of this huge uncertainty as to what will be happening. And unfortunately, we are now threatened with the issue of food insecurity.